Mark Daly had always enjoyed long drives through quiet roads, especially the wide and open places of New Mexico. He liked the sense of space, the way the sky looked bigger than anything else, and how the horizon stretched without end. On this trip, he had planned only a short break from work, just a few days to clear his head. He had set out with a light heart, thinking a little time alone would help him breathe again, but he had not expected the land to test him the way it soon would. The afternoon sun was still high when his truck began making a strange clicking sound. At first Mark ignored it, thinking it was just dust or gravel caught somewhere underneath. But the noise grew louder, sharper, and suddenly the engine gave one long cough and died. The truck rolled forward a few more feet, then stopped in the middle of a lonely desert road with nothing but dry shrubs, scattered rocks, and distant mesas around him. He tried the key again, then again. But it only made a weak sound like it was trying to breathe but couldn't. The fuel gauge was fine. The battery seemed okay too. Whatever the problem was, he could not fix it on his own. He stepped outside and looked around, hoping maybe he had passed a small station or house without noticing. But the landscape was empty, as if the world had stretched out and left him alone in the center of it. Even the wind was quiet, only brushing against the sand in slow waves. His phone had no signal at all. He tried holding it toward the sky, turning in slow circles. But nothing changed. Mark checked the time. The sun would not set for a couple of hours, so he felt he still had a chance to reach help before nightfall. He remembered a map he had glanced at earlier in the morning and thought there might be a ranger station somewhere near the base of a faraway mesa. It looked close enough, standing tall with a reddish glow in the light, so he decided to walk toward it. Maybe there would be a radio, a cabin, or at least someone who could help. He grabbed his backpack, a small bottle of water, and started walking. At first, he moved with confidence, thinking he would make it on time, but the desert ground was uneven, filled with loose stones that made every step a little harder. After only a short distance, he could feel how dry the air was. Each breath took moisture from his mouth, and the heat pressed against his skin like a heavy blanket. Still, Mark kept going, believing he could push through. As he walked, the mesa did not seem to get any closer. In fact, it felt farther away, like it was slowly drifting back the more he tried to reach it. He wiped sweat from his forehead and tried not to think about how quickly the sun was beginning to sink. Desert nights could be bitterly cold, but he did not know just how cold until later. About an hour into his walk, he paused to rest, sitting on a flat rock. His water was already halfway gone, and he felt his energy slipping. He looked behind him and saw his truck, now only a tiny shape in the distance. Turning back to the mesa, he squinted, trying to judge the distance. That was when he noticed movement near a cluster of plants a little ways ahead. At first, he thought it was just the wind stirring the branches. But then he saw a figure rise from a crouched position, someone bending over herbs or maybe checking the ground. The figure stood straight, and Mark realized it was a woman. She looked calm, balanced, and fully at ease in the land that was already challenging him. Mark approached slowly in case she did not want company. When he was close enough, she looked up. She had long, dark hair tied back, a sharp but peaceful expression, and deep eyes that seemed to read him in a single glance. She wore simple clothes, light, practical, and well-suited for the weather. "Are you all right?" she asked before he even spoke. Her voice was steady, not fearful or surprised. It was as if she had expected someone to appear. Mark tried to smile, though he knew he must have looked tired and dusty. "My truck broke down," he said. "I'm trying to reach the ranger station." She studied the direction he pointed to, then looked back at him. "You won't make it before night," she said plainly. Her words made him laugh a little, not out of humor but from disbelief. "It's not that far," he said. "I think I can reach it." She shook her head, her face still calm but firm. "Distance is tricky here. The land looks close, but it's not. And the temperature drops fast after sunset. You're already tired. If you keep walking, you won't be safe tonight." Mark felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. He noticed her backpack filled with herbs, dried leaves, and small tools. She seemed to know the land well, far better than he did. Still, he felt stubbornness rise inside him. He did not want to look weak or frightened. "I appreciate the warning," he said. "But I think I should keep moving." She watched him for a moment, as if deciding whether words alone were enough. Then she stepped closer, her expression serious but not unkind. "Listen carefully," she said. "You're already dehydrated. Your clothes aren't warm enough. And you don't understand desert cold. It is not like city cold, or the kind you expect from a chilly evening. Desert cold steals heat quickly. People think the danger here is the sun, but many are harmed by the night." Her tone was steady, patient, almost like she was used to teaching people who didn't understand the land. Mark felt a small wave of embarrassment. She was right, he had not prepared well. He had not studied the area, checked the weather, or brought the right gear. He had only planned a short drive, thinking everything would go smoothly. Now he stood in front of someone who clearly saw through all his mistakes. "I'm Nalan," she said, breaking his thoughts. "I'm gathering winter herbs for my family. We use this area often. There's shelter nearby. Come with me. We can rest there until morning." Mark hesitated again, unsure if he should follow a stranger. But the sky was already changing colors. The bright blue was fading into softer shades, and he could feel the temperature dropping even now. "I don't want to slow you down," he said softly. "You won't," she replied. "But the cold will stop you if you try to continue on your own." He realized then that she was not trying to control him or force him. She was warning him because she truly understood the danger. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her voice. She spoke with the certainty of someone who knew the land like an old friend. Mark nodded and followed her. As they walked, she moved with confidence, choosing paths he would never have noticed. Small trails between rocks, narrow passages through brush, and shaded spots that offered brief relief from the dry air. The land no longer felt open and empty. It felt like it had hidden paths and quiet secrets only she could see. He asked how she knew this area so well. She explained that her family had lived near this land for generations. Her grandfather had taught her how to navigate the desert, how to read the shape of the rocks, how to tell time by the color of the sky, and how to sense when the weather would turn. Mark listened with growing respect, feeling a little foolish for thinking he could cross the land alone without understanding it. As they walked, the air cooled more quickly than he expected. The wind felt sharper now, carrying the early breath of the night. He rubbed his hands together and quickened his pace. Nalan noticed and said, "This is only the beginning. Soon it will drop even more." Mark swallowed. He had known deserts could get cold, but he had never imagined how fast the warmth could disappear. After some time, Nalan led him toward a cluster of rocks forming a natural alcove. It was sheltered from the wind and partly hidden from view. She told him her family used it during seasonal trips, and that it had kept them safe for many years. Mark stepped inside and felt the air calm around him. The place felt protected, almost welcoming in its quiet way. He looked at Nalan and realized how lucky he was to have met her at the exact moment he needed help. He sat down on a flat rock inside the alcove, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For the first time since the truck broke down, he felt like he might actually make it through the night safely. And as the last bit of sunlight faded from the sky, he understood that everything had changed the moment he met Nalan, the woman who moved with the land, listened to it, and knew exactly how to survive within it. Nalan placed her bag of herbs carefully near the wall of the rock alcove, making sure nothing fell into the dust. Mark followed her inside, feeling slightly unsure of what to do next. But she seemed completely comfortable, as if she had walked this same route hundreds of times. She moved with a quiet confidence that made the space feel safer just because she was in it. The alcove was small but not cramped. The rock above them curved, just enough to block the wind. The ground was mostly smooth sand, with a few stones scattered around. Mark brushed some sand away and sat down, feeling the coolness of the rock beneath him. The sun was gone now, and the sky outside the alcove had turned into a soft mix of purple and blue. The first signs of night were settling in. Nalan took a small bundle from her bag and opened it. Inside were dried branches, thin strips of bark, and a few stone pieces that looked like they had been used before. Mark watched quietly, wondering what she planned to do. She looked at him once, as if checking to make sure he was okay, then said, "We need to make the place warm before the temperature drops too low. Cold arrives faster than people expect. Cold. Cold. Cold." She placed the stones near the alcove entrance, sorting them by size. Then she picked up two and held them together, explaining, "These stones hold heat. If we warm them now, they will help us later when the night becomes colder." She struck the stones gently, creating a few sparks. Mark leaned forward, impressed by how easily she worked. "I usually carry a lighter," she admitted with a small smile. "But the stones remind me of how my grandfather taught me. He said it is important to know more than one way to survive." She soon had a small fire going, nothing large or dramatic, just a gentle flame fed by dried twigs. The glow of the fire filled the alcove with soft, warm light, and Mark instantly felt the comfort of it. After the heat began to build, Nalin used a stick to push the larger stones closer, so they absorbed the warmth. Mark watched her hands, steady and patient. Each movement had purpose. Nothing she did was rushed. It made him realize how quickly he usually rushed through his life, always hurrying to the next thing without taking the time to understand the moment he was standing in. "How long have you known this place?" he asked. "Since I was a child," she said. "My family traveled through these lands often. We gathered plants, visited relatives, and followed certain traditions. My grandfather taught me how to find safe places like this one. He said the desert looks empty, but it offers help if you understand what to look for." Mark looked around the alcove again. He had walked past hundreds of rock formations throughout his trip, but had never known any of them could hold so much protection. To him they were just shapes in the distance, interesting to look at, but nothing more. Nalin, however, saw them as shelter, history, and knowledge passed down through generations. "You must really love this place," he said. Nalin nodded. "I respect it. That's the better word. If you love the land, it doesn't always love you back the same way. But if you respect it, it teaches you how to live with it." The fire flickered softly, reflecting in her eyes. The warmth was welcome. But Mark could already feel the air cooling around the edges of the alcove. He rubbed his hands together, and Nalin noticed. "Your clothes are too thin for desert night," she said kindly. "The wind here pulls heat from the body much faster than people expect." "I thought the desert was only dangerous because of heat," Mark admitted. "It has many faces," she replied. "Each one can be dangerous if you don't understand it." Her tone wasn't accusing. It was simply honest. Mark appreciated that. He had made mistakes that day, but she didn't make him feel foolish for them. Instead, she treated each mistake like something that could be learned from. After the fire grew steady, she picked up a handful of sagebrush that she had carried in her bag. She broke the branches into smaller pieces and began to place them near the entrance to block some of the cold air. The leaves released a soft, calming scent that filled the alcove. "What are those for?" Mark asked. "Sagebrush helps trap heat and also keeps the air inside fresh," she explained. "It's something my family has always done. When the night is long, a small comfort like this makes a big difference." Mark reached out and touched a leaf gently. It was dry, but it felt soft against his fingers. He found himself breathing in the scent, feeling calmer than he had since his truck had broken down. Nalin sat down near him and looked at the sky outside, which had now turned darker. Stars were forming, bright and clear, just above the horizon. The desert sky was wide, free of city lights, and stunningly open. Mark felt his heart slow down as he watched the stars appear one by one. He felt comfortable enough to speak more freely. "I didn't expect my trip to turn into something like this," he said. "I thought I would just take a short break and return home. Sometimes the land teaches you something even when you didn't plan for it," Nalin said. "What do you think it's teaching me right now?" he asked, half joking. She turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe patience, maybe humility. Maybe that you shouldn't walk into a place you don't understand without learning about it first. And maybe it's teaching you that accepting help isn't a weakness." Mark looked down at the sand. She was right. He had always tried to handle everything by himself, believing that needing help meant he wasn't strong enough. But sitting here now, he felt something different. He felt grateful. Not weak, just grateful. The fire crackled lightly as the wind outside grew colder. Mark could feel the night settling fully around them now. A deep chill touching the air. He had never experienced cold like this, sharp, sudden, and almost silent in its arrival. Nalin stood and checked the heated stones. When she placed one near him, he felt a wave of warmth move through the air. "These will help," she said. "But later, when the night becomes colder, we will need to stay close so the heat doesn't escape." Mark nodded, trusting her judgment completely. She wasn't dramatic or alarming, just clear and matter-of-fact. He knew she had kept herself safe in this land many times before, and he felt relieved that she was guiding him now. As the night deepened, the firelight became their only source of brightness. The world outside seemed far away, wrapped in stillness. The sky glittered with so many stars that Mark felt he was seeing the night for the first time in years. To pass the time, he asked about her work with herbs. Nalin explained how she gathered plants seasonally, how she learned which ones helped with health, and how her grandmother taught her which leaves were good for calming the mind or easing a sore throat. Mark listened with fascination, realizing that everything she knew had been taught through stories and practice, not textbooks or screens. He shared a little about his own life, his fast-paced job, the stress he had been trying to escape, the noise of the city that sometimes made him feel like he was losing himself. As he spoke, he felt lighter, as if the desert air helped loosen the heaviness he had been carrying. Nalin listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. She seemed to understand far more than her simple nods revealed. When he finished speaking, she said, "Sometimes people think they need to go far away to relax. But what they really need is to slow down and listen to themselves." Mark smiled softly. "This is definitely slowing me down. And teaching you," she added gently. He nodded. She was right again. The wind outside softened for a moment, and silence filled the alcove. Mark felt calm, even peaceful. It was strange, just hours earlier he had been worried, frustrated, and unsure of what to do. Now, even though the situation was still serious, he felt grounded. He looked at Nalin again, and she looked back at him with a steady expression, as if she could see the change happening inside him. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. The desert, the cold, the fire, the stars, and her presence had already done enough teaching for one night. Soon, the fire began to shrink, and the air grew colder. Mark understood now why she had warned him earlier. The cold wasn't loud or dramatic. It slipped in quietly, lowering the temperature bit by bit until the air felt icy. He wrapped his arms around himself, feeling the chill settle into his clothes. Nalin added more sagebrush around the entrance and checked the heated stones again. The night was still far from over. But thanks to her knowledge, the alcove felt warm enough to face whatever the cold tried to bring. Mark knew that he was safe because she was there, guiding him through a world he didn't understand. And as the firelight flickered against the stone walls, he realized something important. This night would change him forever. The night settled around the alcove like a heavy blanket, soft but cold at the edges. The sky outside had turned a deep blue mixed with black, and the stars shone so brightly that it almost felt like they were closer than the ground. Mark had never seen the night sky like this, not from the city, not from any place he had ever stayed before. It felt endless and quiet in a way that made him both calm and aware of how small he was compared to the world around him. Inside the alcove, the fire had burned down to glowing orange coals, giving just enough light to see the soft outlines of the rocks. The heat from the stones Nalin had warmed earlier helped, but it was clear that the cold was getting stronger. It crept into the air slowly, almost gently, but it did not stop. Every few minutes, Mark felt a new wave of chill brushing against his skin. Nalin noticed him rubbing his arms again and said softly, "It is time to prepare for the deeper cold. The night gets much colder from now on." Her voice was calm and steady, not rushed or worried. She spoke the way someone speaks when they know exactly what needs to be done. Mark nodded, trusting her completely. He had already seen how much she understood the desert, how easily she read the land and the sky, and how natural it was for her to survive here. She checked the heated stones one more time and moved them closer to where they would be resting. Then she took out a woven blanket made from thick wool. It looked old but well cared for, and it carried a faint scent that reminded Mark of dry grass and summers long gone. "This blanket is special to my family," she said, gently shaking it out. "It holds warmth well, but we must use it correctly to keep the cold from getting in." Mark nodded again, trying to follow every instruction she gave. The temperature continued to drop, and he could feel the air turning sharper, like the cold was reaching deeper each time he breathed. He had never felt a night like this. Even winter mornings in the city had never carried this kind of chill. Nalin sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel her presence immediately warming the space between them. She explained in simple, matter-of-fact words, "When people share warmth, the cold has fewer places to enter. It is not unusual. Many travelers through the desert have used this method for years." Mark listened carefully. Not embarrassed or uncomfortable, only grateful. She spoke with sincerity. Nothing else. Her tone was kind and professional, like a guide helping a lost traveler. There was no judgment, no awkwardness, only the simple truth of survival. He could already feel that the cold was stronger than the fire now. Even the heated stones, though warm, were no match for the night's deep chill. The air around them became thin and icy, making every small movement of wind feel like it was brushing frost against his skin. Nalin tucked the blanket around both of them, making sure no part of it was loose or hanging open. The wool held the heat well, keeping the warmth from escaping. Inside the blanket, the air felt calmer, and Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. As the warmth spread through the small space beneath the blanket, Mark felt a sense of relief wash over him. He was safe. Not completely comfortable yet, but safe. Because Nalin knew what she was doing. Safe because she had guided him with patience and clarity. Safe because she understood how to keep them warm through a desert night that was colder than anything he had ever imagined. For a while, they stayed quiet, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, almost like the desert itself was resting. After some time, Mark spoke softly, wanting to understand her better. "You said your grandfather taught you many things. Did you come out here often with him?" Nalin nodded, keeping her eyes on the fire. "Yes. He believed that the land teaches more than words can. He would bring me here during different seasons so I could learn how the desert changes. He said that every part of nature has meaning if you learn to see it." "What kind of things did he teach you?" Mark asked, truly curious. "He taught me how to track animals without disturbing them," she said. "How to read the wind and know when a storm is coming. How to find plants that help with illness. How to stay safe when the cold arrives suddenly like tonight. And he taught me to listen to the land, to the sky, and to myself." Mark smiled quietly. "It sounds like he was a good teacher. One of the best," she replied with a soft warmth in her voice. The blanket held the heat well now, making the cold outside feel distant, as if it belonged to another world entirely. Mark felt comfortable enough to speak more freely. "I never learned things like that growing up," he said. "I spent most of my time in cities. Everything was fast. Work, traffic, people, everything moved too quickly. Sometimes I felt like I was just trying to keep up." Nalin listened without interrupting. Her presence made it easy for him to speak honestly. He felt like she understood even the things he didn't say out loud. "I think that's why I came out here," he continued. "I needed quiet. I needed space. But I didn't expect the land to be this unforgiving." "It isn't unforgiving," she corrected gently. "It simply asks you to respect it. When you understand it, it becomes your friend. But when you ignore its ways, it tests you." Mark thought about that for a moment. He realized she was right. He had walked into the desert with confidence but without preparation. He had assumed he could handle it, just like he handled everything else quickly and without thinking too much. But the desert didn't follow his pace. It had its own rhythm, its own rules. He felt a deep sense of humility settle inside him. The fire flickered softly, sending shadows dancing across the stone walls. The night outside grew even darker, and the wind quieted for a moment, as if listening to their conversation. "Do you ever get scared out here?" Mark asked quietly. Nalin shook her head. "Not scared. Respectful, yes. Cautious, always. The desert can change quickly. But fear doesn't help. Knowledge does." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of experience. Mark admired her strength, not the bold, loud kind, but a quiet strength that came from understanding and patience. He felt calmer than he had in years. Even with the cold, even with the uncertainty of tomorrow, he felt a sense of peace settling around him. The warmth inside the blanket, the steady rhythm of Nalin's presence, and the soft glow of the fire created a space that felt safe, almost comforting. The hours passed slowly but gently. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they sat quietly, listening to the sounds of the night. Mark learned about the traditions Nalin's family followed, how they honored the land, how they used stories to pass knowledge through generations. Each story she shared was thoughtful and filled with meaning. In return, he shared small pieces of his own life, not the stressful parts, but the simple memories, the moments he missed when life became too busy. He talked about fishing with his father as a child, about his mother's old garden, and about how he used to watch the stars from his rooftop before the city lights swallowed them. Nalin smiled at those stories, understanding them in her own way. The desert night continued to stretch on, but inside the alcove, the warmth and their quiet conversation made the hours feel soft and slow. The blanket held the heat well, and the heated stones helped the air stay comfortable. At one point, Mark felt his eyes grow heavy. He hadn't realized how tired he was until the warmth finally soothed the tension from his body. The fear he had felt earlier, fear of the cold, fear of being alone, fear of not making it to safety, slowly faded. Nalin noticed him relaxing and said softly, "Rest. Morning will come sooner than you think." Her voice carried reassurance, and Mark allowed himself to close his eyes. He felt completely safe, wrapped in warmth and protected from the harsh cold outside. As he drifted into sleep, the last thing he felt was gratitude, deep, sincere gratitude for the woman who had guided him through the desert night, shared her knowledge with patience, and kept him warm when the land grew too cold. The first hint of morning came quietly, long before the sun actually rose. It appeared as a soft change in the air, a gentle shift from the deep cold of the night to a lighter, softer chill. Mark stirred beneath the blanket, feeling the warmth still held inside it. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. The strange mix of sand beneath him, the faint smell of sagebrush, and the glowing coals beside him slowly brought everything back into place. He opened his eyes and saw the sky outside the alcove turning a pale shade of gray-blue. It wasn't bright yet, but it held the promise of sunlight. The stars were still visible, but they seemed softer now, dimming as the new day crept forward. Nalin was already awake. She sat near the fire, adding a few dried twigs to the remaining embers. She moved quietly, as if trying not to disturb the peace of the early morning. When she noticed Mark waking up, she gave him a small, warm smile. "Morning is here," she said softly. "The coldest part of the night has passed." Mark pushed himself up slowly, surprised by how calm he felt. The blanket still held warmth, and the air inside the alcove wasn't nearly as cold as he had expected. Nalin had truly known exactly what to do. He stretched his arms gently, feeling grateful that his body wasn't stiff or aching from the night. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. "Not long," she replied. "I like watching the sky change. It reminds me how each day gives us another chance to start again." Her words carried a quiet truth that made Mark smile. He stepped toward the entrance of the alcove and looked out at the land. The desert looked completely different now. The soft morning light touched the rocks and sand, turning them into warm shades of gold and orange. The wind was gentle, flowing across the ground like a slow breath. Everything looked peaceful, as if the land that had tested him just hours before was now offering forgiveness. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. Nalin stood beside him, folding the blanket neatly. "The morning is my favorite time," she said. "The world feels new. The mistakes of yesterday don't follow you. And the day ahead becomes a gift." Mark nodded. He felt that more clearly than ever. Last night had been hard, frightening, and humbling. But it had also opened something inside him, something he didn't even know he needed. As the sun slowly rose, the temperature began to climb. The cold faded with every minute. Soon the warmth of the day would be strong enough to move without fear. Nalin gathered her herbs and placed them carefully back into her bag. She checked the ground to make sure they weren't leaving anything behind. The alcove returned to its natural state, as if no one had stayed there at all. Mark admired that about her, how she treated the land with respect, never leaving a trace of her presence. "What happens now?" Mark asked. "We walk," she answered simply. "I'll take you to the nearby trail. Rangers pass through it in the morning. They can take you back to the main road." Mark felt a wave of relief. He had almost forgotten about his broken truck. Now that it was safe again, he remembered that he still had a long way to go, but he also felt a small sense of sadness at the idea of leaving the calm and wisdom of the night behind. They stepped out of the alcove, feeling the fresh morning air on their faces. Nalin walked confidently, leading the way. Mark followed beside her, trying to take in every detail: the soft sand beneath their feet, the gentle wind, the small sounds of insects waking with the daylight. Everything felt peaceful and alive. "Last night," Mark said softly after a while, "you didn't just help me survive the cold. You taught me something important." Nalin glanced at him with curiosity. "What did you learn?" "That I don't listen enough," he replied. "I rush through things. I don't slow down to understand my surroundings. I thought I knew what I was doing out here, but I didn't. And if I hadn't met you, I might not have made it." Nalin didn't say anything right away. She walked for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Many people come to the desert for peace. Some find it. Some get lost. But you listened when it mattered. That's what kept you safe." Mark looked at her gratefully. "I'll never forget last night." She smiled gently, but with a calmness that showed she was used to helping people without expecting anything in return. They walked in silence for a while, each step bringing them closer to safety. The sun rose higher, warming the land. Colors spread over the rocks: orange, red, gold, and soft browns. Mark couldn't help but admire how beautiful the desert looked when you truly paid attention. The quietness felt comforting. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the kind that feels full of meaning, full of presence, full of everything that the land held. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a small trail marked by faint tire tracks and a weathered wooden post. It wasn't a road, but it was enough to guide rangers and hikers through certain parts of the desert. Nalin stopped beside the path and pointed toward the east. "This is where they'll come from," she said. "They usually pass by within an hour." Mark nodded, feeling both relief and a strange sense of loss. He had expected to feel completely safe once they reached this point, but instead, he felt something else, a realization that he was about to leave behind someone who had changed him in a single night. "Nalin," he said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," she replied softly. "You listened. You learned. That is enough." He stepped closer, wanting to say more. I wish I could help you in return somehow." "You helped by trusting me," she said. "Some people don't. They argue. They insist they know better. You followed the path I showed. That made everything easier." Mark felt warmth in his chest. Her words meant more than she knew. The morning sky was clear now. The sun rose higher, lighting the trail with gentle brightness. Mark shaded his eyes and looked into the distance. "Will I see you again?" he asked, even though he already sensed the answer. She gave a small, calm smile. "Maybe. The desert has its own way of bringing people together and letting them go." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a refusal either. It was simply the truth of the land. They stood quietly for a moment. The wind moved through the sagebrush, carrying the scent of earth and sunlight. Mark wished he could stay a little longer, just to understand her world better, but he knew he had to return to his own life sooner or later. A distant humming sound broke the silence. It grew louder slowly. Mark turned and saw a ranger vehicle approaching along the trail. Nalin stepped back a little, giving Mark space. "This is your ride," she said softly. Mark felt a tightness in his chest but nodded. "Thank you for everything." Nalin placed a hand over her heart in a simple gesture of respect. "Travel safely," she said. The ranger vehicle stopped, and the driver rolled down the window, greeting Mark with surprise and concern. After a brief explanation, they opened the door for him to climb in. Before entering, Mark turned back one last time. Nalin stood where he had left her, calm, steady, and peaceful against the vast desert behind her. The sunlight touched her hair, turning it into a soft glow. She raised her hand in a small wave, and Mark returned it. Then the vehicle began to move, carrying him away from the path, from the alcove, and from the woman who had guided him through one of the most important nights of his life. As the desert stretched out behind him, Mark felt something inside him shift. He wasn't the same man who had left his truck yesterday. The fear, the cold, the silence, and Nalin's wisdom had changed him in a way he knew he would never forget. When he reached the main road hours later, when the rangers helped him fix his truck, when he finally drove back toward home, one thought stayed with him. He had come to the desert seeking rest, but he had found something deeper: understanding, humility, and a quiet lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. And somewhere out there, in the wide and ancient land, Nalin continued her walk, gathering herbs and listening to the desert the way her family always had. Mark knew he would never forget her.